I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else. Not the penguin. Not the 5'0" tyrant in a dispatcher's booth. Not the career that survived every prediction of failure. The thing worth understanding is what held all of it together. A woman from Brooklyn who walked into a small theater one January night, forgot entirely why she had come, and could not look away from the man on that stage. She saw him before any credentials existed. She chose him before the world had any reason to. At 81, Danny DeVito has finally said it plainly. She was the only love of his life. But to understand what that means, you have to go back to the beginning, to a childhood that handed him 4 words of rejection before it gave him 6 words of pride, to a body that hurt every single day in ways he hid for decades, to a city that kept telling him he was wrong. The wrong size, the wrong face, the wrong shape, for the frame. He didn't change the frame. He burned the contract and built his own. He was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey, and from the very first day, the world seemed to be making a point. His mother, Julia, was 40 years old when he arrived. She had already raised several children and had not wanted another one. She would say so. Years later, with a plainness that landed like a stone. I didn't want him, but I am so proud of him. 4 words of rejection. 6 words of pride. A little boy left to figure out which ones to carry. Danny carried both his whole life. That early wound, the sense of being an afterthought in the house, where you were supposed to matter most, never fully left him. He pushed against it. He used it as fuel, but it was always there, underneath everything. The quiet engine of a man who spent his entire career proving something to a world that had decided he was too quite right. His father owned a candy shop in Asbury Park, well-liked around town during the day. When the drinking started at night, something shifted. Young Danny learned to read those signs the way children in certain kinds of homes always do. The change in the air, the pause before the door opens. Between 1950 and 1955, police were called to their home at least 17 times. He hid in closets. He ran to the neighbors. He learned very early that the world was not reliably safe, and that the safest thing he could do was become someone no room could ignore. There was something else he carried, something nobody could see. He was born with Fairbanks disease, a rare skeletal condition that stopped his growth at 4 feet 10 inches. But the height was almost beside the point. The disease attacked his joints, his hips, his knees, his back. By his 20s, his pain on any given day sat between a 6 and an 8 out of 10. Hollywood told him to stay quiet about it. Weakness was not marketable, so he kept quiet, and he kept going. The damage this kind of childhood does to a person is not always visible from the outside. Sometimes it looks like ambition. Sometimes it looks like a man who cannot stop working, who fills every silence with presence, who has never learned how to need anything from anyone. Sometimes it looks exactly like Danny DeVito. He ended up in New York, the way a lot of young actors did in those years. Broke, hopeful, and entirely unclear about how any of it was supposed to work. He shared a $75 a month apartment with Michael Douglas, who was quietly not mentioning that his father was Kirk Douglas. They ate canned beans. They split their last 27 on headshots and walked them across the city by hand. Douglas booked roles. Danny kept getting rejected. He parked cars. He stood motionless in a clothing store window, pretending to be a mannequin for hours at a stretch. For a period he could not measure by calendar because he preferred not to. He lived out of his Volkswagen Beetle and showered at the MCA. He kept that story private for decades. He was told, repeatedly and in increasingly elaborate ways, to change. One studio offered him the equivalent of nearly $1 million in today's money. If he would agree to surgery, procedures to reshape his face into something more comfortable for mainstream audiences. He said no. He burned the contract at a beach bonfire. He told the casting director who pushed him, "I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else." He meant it completely. What people misunderstand about Danny DeVito, what the tabloid version of his story always gets wrong, is that he was never simply a man who overcame his limitations. He was a man who refused to accept the premise that they were limitations at all. The height, the face, the body that hurt. These were not things to apologize for or surgically correct. They were exactly who he was. And he had decided, at some point in those hungry years in New York, that who he was would be enough or nothing. It would turn out to be quite a lot more than enough. By January of 1971, Danny DeVito was 26 years old. He had been rejected more times than he could count. He was still performing wherever he could get a stage, including a small off-Broadway production called The Shrinking Bride. Not a landmark show, not the kind of thing that ends up in theater history books. Just a modest play in a modest venue in New York City. Rhea Perlman had gone to see a friend in the cast. That was the only reason she was there. She was 22, born and raised in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the daughter of a Polish immigrant who worked in the toy business. She had studied drama at Hunter College, graduated in 1968, and had been waitressing at the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center while auditioning for whatever she could find. Sharp, funny, with the specific confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are before the world. Has weighed in on the matter. She sat down to watch her friend perform, and then she saw him. There was a stocky man on that stage, not tall, not the face that gets you cast as the Hollywood leading man. And he was commanding the room completely. Something in the way he moved, the way he timed every line, the way he existed in his own gravitational field made Rhea Perlman forget entirely why she had come. When the show ended, she asked around, "Did he have a girlfriend?" No, she did not wait for a formal introduction. "I had to meet him immediately," she would say years later, still laughing. "I came on to him big time." After the show, they went to dinner and talked for hours. Danny DeVito, the man who had spent the better part of a decade being told he was wrong in every direction, sat across from a woman from Brooklyn who thought he was the most riveting person she had ever watched on a stage. He would say later that he knew within 22 minutes of meeting her that she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. Not a possibility. The woman, 2 weeks later, Rhea moved into his Manhattan apartment. 2 weeks. Not a careful courtship, not a strategic progression. Two people from similar worlds, working-class roots, big ambitions, the specific toughness of people who had never had anything handed to them, who looked at each other and recognized something they hadn't known they were looking for. They would live together for 11 years before getting married. Not because the commitment was uncertain. Because neither of them needed a piece of paper to understand what they already had. The break came through Michael Douglas, the way so many things in Danny S. life came, through loyalty held across lean years. In 1975, Douglas was producing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, adapted from Ken Kesey's novel to be directed by Milos Forman. He wanted Danny, the director resisted. The studio wanted a bigger name. Douglas held firm. Danny was cast as Martini, a psychiatric patient, a role he had actually played years earlier in a stage version of the same story, which meant he walked onto that set, already knowing exactly who that man was. He was on screen for 5 minutes and 52 seconds. He left a mark that people are still describing 50 years later. The film won 5 Academy Awards. Danny was not nominated, but he was finally on the map. Then, in 1978, he made a move everyone told him was professional suicide. He turned down 3 film roles to audition for a television sitcom called Taxi. His own agent told him not to do it. Danny had read the script and knew, the same way he had known when he met Rhea, immediately, without needing anyone's confirmation, that something true was in it. The character was Louis De Palma, a dispatcher, mean, petty, unapologetically awful in every direction. A man who used his small amount of power with the gleeful cruelty of someone who had always been told he did to have enough. It was, in ways Danny never said publicly, a character he understood from the inside. He walked into that audition and delivered a 7-minute monologue that left the room silent. ABC was nervous about his height. Creator James L. Brooks threatened to quit if they didn't cast him. They cast him. Danny signed the contract without negotiating, even though it paid 40% less than what the other actors were making. He didn't care. He knew what the role was worth. He just needed the chance to prove it. Then, in the 2nd season of Taxi, Rhea joined the cast. She played Zena Sherman, Louis De Palma's girlfriend. The producers had no idea Danny and Rhea had been living together for years. They thought the chemistry was exceptional acting. It was exceptional acting. It was also 2 people who knew each other the way very few human beings ever truly know another person. In January of 1982, after 11 years together, they got married, quietly, without a production. That same year, Rhea began her role as Carla Tortelli on Cheers, the sharp, wise-cracking barmaid who would become one of the most beloved characters in American television. She won 4 Emmy Awards for it. Danny talked about her success the way a man talks, when the pride he feels is larger than any award he ever won himself. In 1983, working at nights and on weekends while still filming Taxi, they quietly founded Jersey Films together. Over the next 2 decades, it became one of the most consequential independent production companies in American cinema, producing Pulp Fiction, Erin Brockovich, Out of Sight, Garden State, and others. The Pulp Fiction story alone tells you something about how they operated. Quentin Tarantino had been turned down by other studios. Danny and his partners kept the project alive, gave Tarantino's company money and office space, and let him make his film on $8 million. He promised it would look like a $25 million movie. He kept his promise. They did all of this while raising 3 children. Lucy, born in 1983, Grace, in 1985, Jacob, in 1987. They kept a rule for decades. No more than 2 weeks would go by without them working on something creative together. Not performing a marriage. Building something. The clearest picture of what that partnership looked like came in 1996, with Matilda. Danny directed, played the awful Mr. Wormwood, cast Rhea as his equally awful Puff, and let their own children appear in small roles. What audiences never saw was what was happening off-camera. The young actress playing Matilda, Mara Wilson, was dealing with her mother's cancer during production. Danny and Rhea quietly became a shelter for her, caring for her the way you care for someone who belongs to you. Before filming was finished, Danny arranged for a near-final cut to be screened at the hospital so Mara's mother could see it before she passed. Mara Wilson would say, years later, that they had felt like her favorite aunt and uncle, that they had made something unbearable, slightly more bearable, in a way she never forgot. This is the thing that posters and award nominations never captured. The man who played monsters on screen was, in the quiet parts of his life, consistently one of the good ones. In October of 2012, after 30 years of marriage and more than 40 years together, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman announced their separation. The world reacted as though something had been taken from it. In a Hollywood landscape full of relationships that lasted about as long as a press cycle, Danny and Rhea had been proof, for millions of ordinary people, that something different was possible. not a performed love story. Two real people from real places who had built a real life together, and you could feel the difference. When they separated, people who had never met either of them felt the loss as something personal. Here is where the myth needs correcting, because the public story that followed, the tragic ending of a great love, was never the truth. They did not divorce. By March of 2013, just 5 months after the announcement, they reconciled. They tried again. They went to therapy. 38 sessions by some accounts. Danny rented out the same restaurant where they had spent one of their early dates. They were together again. They separated a second time in 2017. And still, they did not divorce. When Rhea was asked by the New York Post in 2018 why they had never formally ended the marriage, her answer had the quality of someone who was past needing to dress things up. I've been together a very long time, so there are a lot of love and history. We agree on enough things, so why ruin that with the yucky things that come with a divorce? Danny bought a house less than a mile from Rhea's. They talked every single day. They met regularly at the same restaurant, at the same table. Their son once noted that they shared a Netflix account and texted each other while watching the same shows from separate houses. This is not how you talk about someone you used to love. This is not how you behave towards someone you have left behind. This is the behavior of two people who looked at the form their relationship had taken, decided the form was less important than the foundation, and kept showing up for each other inside of whatever shape it happened to be. When Danny spoke to Fox News Digital in 2024, he was asked about Rhea. He didn't pause. "We're doing great. We see each other all the time." Then he said the part that carries more weight than any grand declaration could. "You know, Rhea and I met in 1970. We've been together for that long, and you grow together. It is like you really know how each other's feeling, all the time. We participate in conversation daily. We participate in conversation daily. Not I still love her. Not she means the world to me. Just, we talk every day. We know what the other person is feeling. We show up." In the plainest language he could find, he described the shape of a love that had outlasted every definition anyone had tried to put on it. In 2019, when Rhea appeared on Watch What Happens Live and Andy Cohen asked plainly whether she and Danny would ever divorce, she looked at him as if the question genuinely puzzled her. "What for?" she said, and in 2022, she said something that stopped people. "Sometimes I wish we were still together, because those were the glory days. But these are other kinds of glory days. Other kinds of glory days." There is an entire philosophy of love inside that sentence if you sit with it long enough. In 2025, Danny finally began speaking publicly about Fairbanks disease in a way he never had before. Not for himself, for the children who could afford treatment, for the people living in daily pain with no public voice. He had been donating quietly for years, more than $12 million to fund bone condition research, none of it under his own name, none of it attached to a press release. He had cared more about the outcome than the credit, which is either the mark of exceptional character or the habit of a man who learned very young not to expect acknowledgement. Now, he was speaking, too, about the decades of pressure from Hollywood to look more physically typical. About the surgery they had offered him money to undergo, the contract he had burned at a beach bonfire. He had said no in his 20s, broken sleeping in a Volkswagen. He was still saying no at 81 ID. Rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else. The same words, the same man. At 81, Danny DeVito is still working. He is producing a sports documentary series for Prime Video with his son Jake and daughter Lucy. He is still playing Frank Reynolds on it, as Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a show he joined in 2006 when it was struggling and has never left. He showed up when they needed him, and he stayed. That appears to be something he has always known how to do. He and Rhea still talk every day. They still have the same restaurant table. They are still, legally, and in every way that seems to matter to both of them, husband and wife. Asked to describe what Rhea had meant to his life, Danny answered, in the way he tends to answer the things that matter most, without reaching for anything grand. We have 3 beautiful children. Now we have grandchildren. The family-s growing. We participate in conversation daily. No poetry. No sweeping declaration. Just a man at 81 describing the daily shape of his life with the person he has known the longest, in the plainest language he could find. Sometimes the plainest language is the truest kind. Danny DeVito was told, at nearly every stage of his life, that he was not enough. He refused to change. He burned contracts. He showed up in pain and never said why. He gave quietly and without applause. He played monsters while being, in the private corners of his life, one of the genuinely good ones. And the woman who walked into a theater one night in January 1971 and thought he was the most interesting person in the room. She stayed, too. Different house now. Same conversation, every single day. Some things do not end. Just because the form they take changes, some people find each other early and never fully let go. And the rest of the story, however long and difficult and strange it gets, is just what happens in between the finding. Danny DeVito found Rhea Perlman on January 17, 1971. He has not stopped finding her since, which raises a question worth sitting with, not about them, but about all of us. Is staying, even in a form the world doesn't quite recognize as love, sometimes the most honest thing 2 people can do for each other? And if love is less about the shape it takes than about the choice to keep showing up inside of it, what does that mean for the rest of us and the people we keep finding every single day?